Welcome to the video lecture for Chapter 8 that focuses on employing news media tactics. These past few weeks, we've spent a lot of time looking at the relationship of sport PR practitioners with the media. And this chapter is going to continue that conversation, but we're going to look a little bit more at the tactics that sport PR practitioners can employ. We're going to look the most at the news release. News releases, sometimes called press releases, are bits of information that sport PR practitioners can create in order to put an event or an important occurrence in front of news media members' eyes with the hope that they will write a story on whatever's going on at that sport organization. So news releases are used quite often and are a really important part of a sport PR practitioner's job. So today we're going to look a little bit more at what they are, but also how to write a news release. Let's go ahead and get started. A news release is the most frequently used news media tactic. They're really good ways for organizations to get information in front of media outlet members' eyes. But all news releases are not equal. Some can be written really poorly so that the media outlet has no desire to cover the event, or they could be written really well and it makes it really easy for the member of the media to get excited about covering the event. And so news releases should consider certain characteristics. The first is that a news release is going to need news value. We will talk on the next slide about how to make sure your news release has some newsworthiness to it. They also need to be written in a standard news release format. And so today we'll look at how to create that format. The good news is that if you can learn how the format functions, you can really start to write a lot of these news releases quite quickly because you're not reinventing them every time you have to write one. And the third thing is that they need to be distributed properly. If ISU Athletics wants to put a news release out about an upcoming game, most likely they would send that news release to the Idaho State Journal, and the ISJ would have pretty good interest in covering the story or covering the game. But if the athletics department were to send that same news release to the Los Angeles Times, they're probably not going to have much luck getting the LA Times to write a story on it or to even cover it, because readers of the LA Times are more interested in news either at the national, international, or Southern California region. And they might not be so interested in a game in Pocatello, Idaho. Now, if the game in Pocatello was against UCLA or against the University of Southern California, then there might be a greater chance, and so it would make sense if ISU Athletics sends a news release to the LA Times. But you need to make sure that you send them to the right media outlet that's going to have an interest in covering an event because it makes sense for their readers. So how did you determine if your news release has any news value or newsworthiness? The chapter is going to give us a nice acronym to help you determine that, and the acronym is TIPCUP. Each of these letters is going to stand for a different item of newsworthiness, and those include timeliness, impact, prominence, conflict, unusualness, and proximity. Your news release might include one of these, a couple of these, but most likely not all of these in order to create some type of newsworthiness. But the first item is timeliness. So if you work for an organization and you're putting out a news release, you need to make sure that the event is going to be coming up within a week. If it is already passed, your news release is going to have no value. If the event isn't for another month, then the newspaper isn't going to be interested in covering it because it's too far away. So you want to make sure that there is timeliness around your event. The other thing you want to take into consideration is if there are other things going on, maybe at the national level or international level, that you can take advantage of. So for example, Nike released a LeBron James shoe right around the time of the NBA All-Star Game. It was a nice way to cross-promote the launch of this new shoe with the game, the All-Star Game that LeBron James was going to be playing in. So timeliness can also mean that you are releasing information that corresponds and is timely with another event. Another item of news value is impact. You want to consider the impact of the event or the product on readers and viewers, not necessarily on members of the news media. It doesn't matter how it impacts them, but is the story going to be something that is impactful that people of that newspaper or television station are going to be interested in? A third item is prominence. And prominence simply relates to how high level an individual is. If LeBron James were going to be attending a game at ISU, then that would be a level of prominence that the newspaper or KPVI might be interested in covering. You want to think about how you can utilize prominent organizational spokespeople or VIPs to attract attention. Another item is conflict, and sports is a great area to emphasize conflict within a game. Recently, ISU football played the University of Idaho, and this was framed as the beginning of a huge rivalry, the conflict of these two teams in the same state coming together for the first time in several years to play against each other. It's a focus on the conflict within sport to focus more on the battles and what is at risk if a team wins or loses. Sports fans typically love to focus on the conflict within sport, and so that can be a really easy way to get some news value out of a release. You can also focus on unusualness. So is there something that is out of the ordinary? The textbook used the example of the player from the University of South Carolina who had retired from the military, went back to school, and decided to walk on to the football team. He was in his late 30s, and so having a retired military member in his late 30s playing for an NCAA team was really unusual, and that was caught the attention and made it interesting for media outlets to cover. And then the last item is proximity. It's really good to start local because people are going to be most interested in stories that relate to people around them. And so consider how you can find a local angle to whatever you're writing on. Once you've determined the newsworthiness or the angle that you're going to do for your news release, you need to start putting one of them together. And I'm going to have you take a second to pull your textbook out to turn to page 158 and 159, because the textbook is going to give us a nice visual representation so you can visually see how a press release is put together. So go ahead, feel free to pause the video and pull your textbook out. Once you do, the first thing we're going to focus on is the header. The header is at the very top of page 158 and is the most important part of the news release because this is going to communicate to the media member who this release is coming from. So you'll want to include the organization's name and their logo, an address, a phone number, the date and time that the release is going out to members of the media, as well as a headline or a title. It's also really important to include some contact information. So if I worked at the LA Times and I got this press release from Gatorade, and I'm a journalist and I want to write a story about this because I think there might be people who'd be interested in this new drink, and I want another quote or I need some information, then I know I can call either Jen or Josh, and their phone numbers are there as well as an email address. So that contact information is really important if people want to reach out to get more information. As sport PR practitioners, our job is to provide information. So we need to make sure that we are as accessible and as available as possible. The other important item is on the left side of the page at the top. And it says for immediate release. Most news releases are going to go out and they can immediately be used by members of the media. So most likely you'll put for immediate release, and that means that it is open to be used as soon as members of the media receive the information. But another item that might be placed there instead is the term updated release. If you have additional information to provide, if you need to make edits, or if your organization is in a crisis and more information is coming out, you can send an updated release with a new timestamp on it so members of the media know that this is newer information. And the third type of term that could go up there is an embargoed release. This is rarely used, and this means that a news release would go out, but members of the media shouldn't write on it until a certain time period. And so a good example of this is several years ago when the city of Atlanta hosted the Olympics. They wanted to keep it a secret about who was going to light the final flame from the torch that goes around the world for the Olympics. And the city of Atlanta had gotten Muhammad Ali to light that final flame. And so it was a really big story. It was part of the opening ceremonies. And so Olympic PR members wanted the media to write about it, but they needed to make sure that it was still a secret until it occurred. And so they sent an embargoed release out with the hope that the media would keep it quiet, and then they'd be able to write about it as soon as Ali lit that flame. And so sometimes you can use the embargoed release, but it's really risky because members of the media, their job is to release information. And so you have to trust the journalists that you send embargoed releases to. So it's ultimately a very rarely used item, but important to understand within the sport PR world. After your header, you need to include a title. The example on 158 is the title that reads, Gatorade Unveils G-Series to Meet More Athlete Needs. Notice how the title includes an action verb. In this case, it's unveils, because you want to make sure that your news release title announces something. Here you'll also find that there's a subtitle that provides a little bit more information to the main title. And so the subtitle here is New Product Line Based in Science and Tested with Elite Athletes Nationwide. Not all releases include both a main title and a subtitle, but it is a pretty standard practice that I see fairly often. After the title, you want to include the lead paragraph. The lead is the opening paragraph or two that gives a summary of the most newsworthy elements of the release. All leads should include the 5 W's and the 1 H, which stand for the who, what, where, when, why, and how. Every once in a while, it might not be possible to include all of the 5 W's and 1 H. And so when you look at these items, the why and the how sometimes might not be applicable. So you ought to strive to include all 6 of these, but if you don't have a how or you don't have a why, that's okay, but you most definitely need the who, what, where, and when. A common question is how long should leads be? And there are different approaches depending on the textbook that you look at. Some textbooks say 10 words max, but it's pretty hard to include the 5 W's and 1 H in 10 words. So some textbooks say a 20-second rule. You should be able to read the lead in fewer than 20 seconds. What we're going to follow for this class is the 25 to 40 word rule, because 25 to 40 words gives the writer some flexibility, but also gives enough room for the writer to include the who, what, where, when, why, and how. This is an example of a title and a lead that I found in a press release on Nike's website. The title is as follows: Nike announces strategic leadership changes. Notice that announces is going to serve as the action verb. And then the lead is here. Nike Incorporated announced today that Charlie Denson, Nike brand president since 2006 and a 34-year veteran of the brand, will retire in January 2014. In conjunction with Denson's decision to retire, the company also announced strategic changes in its executive management team as part of the company's long-term organizational strategy to align the business to continue to drive growth. After the header, the title, and the lead, you need to get into the body of the news release. The body of the news release is going to provide a lot of the details of an event or what's ever happening in a sporting organization, and follows the inverted pyramid style. The inverted pyramid style is where a writer puts the most important information first and the least important last. That way, if someone were to just read the first or second paragraph of a news release, they'll get the very basic information about that event. And so after the lead, and for this example, we'll pretend that the ISU women's soccer team is going to hold a silent auction. So the lead would give the who, where, what, why, when, and how about this auction. And then the second section or the second paragraph is going to provide a few more details. This can be when the silent auction is going to be held, what time, where can tickets be purchased, how much are tickets. And then the third section can provide even more information. So if someone decides that they want to go and they know how to buy their tickets, then they might be interested in learning about what types of items will be available at the silent auction. What kinds of things might they be able to bid on? In this third section, you could also include information about where the proceeds will be used. So if the women's soccer team is raising funds in order to help buy some type of equipment, then that could also be in the third section. And then typically within the fourth section, you can provide additional background information or contextualization to place the news or the event in perspective. So a lower paragraph could cover how this is the 15th annual silent auction that the women's soccer team has offered. So as long as in your news release you're focusing on the most important details first and the least important details last, you're going to be adhering to that inverted pyramid style. And think about how you read information. If you're interested in attending an event, you're going to want to find out how do you get tickets? What time is the event? Where is it located? And then after that, you might be interested in where the funds are going to be used or how long the event has been going on. The very last paragraph of any news release is known as a boilerplate. The boilerplate is a standard paragraph that provides basic information about the organization. And a boilerplate has been used for years because it's a really good opportunity to provide information to a journalist that might not be well known or well informed about your company or your organization. And so the boilerplate's point is to provide basic information about an organization to that journalist, especially if he or she is unfamiliar with your organization. Our next slide, I'll give you an example of a boilerplate. But another item that is pretty consistently used is the 30 ending notation. If you look at page 159, you'll notice that the press release ends with 3 hashtags that are centered at the very end of the press release. And this goes back to the time when you might print out a press release, put it in the mail, and mail it to a journalist, and the hashtag identifies the end of the press release. So the journalist will know that they've come to the end of the information and there's not another page or something that they're missing. And so this is a throwback to old days, but we still see these used on almost all news releases. Let's go ahead and look at an example of a boilerplate. This is a boilerplate for Nike, and I'm just going to go ahead and read it so you can follow along. Nike Incorporated, based near Beaverton, Oregon, is the world's leading designer, marketer, and distributor of authentic athletic footwear, apparel, equipment, and accessories for a wide variety of sports and fitness activities. Wholly owned Nike Incorporated subsidiaries include Converse Incorporated, which designs, markets, and distributes athletic lifestyle footwear, apparel, and accessories, and Hurley International LLC, which designs, markets, and distributes surf and youth lifestyle footwear, apparel, and accessories. For more information, visit www.nikeinc.com and follow @Nike. So you'll see here that this provides a little bit more information about Nike, what it sells, who is a part of the overall corporation, and even a website and a Twitter feed. And so the boilerplate, again, is just a good paragraph that provides the journalist with additional information if they need it when they're writing their story based off of the news release. Within sport PR, news releases can fall into a couple of categories. There are certain types and functions of releases that you need to be aware about. The first type are straight news releases. This is the most common type of news release within sport PR, and these are pretty straightforward. They typically focus on things like player trades, the hiring or firing of a head coach, or even an injury update. The second type are competition news releases. These are releases that are used to help a reporter craft a story. They are oftentimes called game advances or pregame notes because these are going to preview a game or a competition. So if you work for a university and there is an upcoming game, you could write a competition news release that's going to focus on the competition of an upcoming game. And that's to help reporters in your area write some type of a preview story on the game. A third type are competition stories, and these allow for sport PR practitioners to write about a game that just happened. These are oftentimes referred to as game recaps. Sometimes if your team loses or might be having a really bad season, competition stories can be hard to write because as a PR person, you need to focus on the positive of a story. So these can be challenging, but you constantly need to figure out a way to highlight something good. So did a player for your team score 30 points or have a double-double if it's basketball and had a lot of rebounds and a lot of points or a lot of steals, then you can try to find some positive angle for your game recap. And then the fourth item are hometown releases. These are unique to the sports industry, and they're oftentimes used by hometown newspapers when a high school player of theirs goes on to a college team. And so if we had a player here for the ISU men's basketball team and he had a really good game, then that player's hometown paper might write an article that highlights ISU. The other angle to hometown releases is if ISU wanted to write a release on that player and send it directly to that media outlet from that player's hometown, that's another way to get coverage for your athletic organization. Once you have your news release created and written, you need to figure out how to distribute it to members of the media. For years, this was solely done through printed distribution, where you would print out your news release, pop it in the mail, and send it to that member of the media. Now, you can imagine that this is not done pretty much at all anymore. But if you have an older member of the media or you have a really important event, and maybe having a paper news release in front of that journalist might make it stand out a little bit more, then that's something to consider. But most news releases are distributed electronically via email. A couple of things to be aware about when distributing your press release through the media, through email. The first thing is you want to take and copy the title of that news release and paste that directly into the subject. That way, when a media reporter sees that email come in, they'll have an idea that it's a news release and they'll immediately know what it's about. And if they're interested, they'll be more encouraged to click and open that email. The other item you want to be aware about is that if you email a news release, you want to make sure you copy the text of that release directly into the email. You never want to attach a news release as an attachment because media outlet members are going to be concerned about viruses. If they don't recognize your name, they're not going to want to open it. So you want to make it as accessible as possible. So instead of attaching that release, copy and paste all of the language directly into the text of that email, and then you'll have a much higher chance of having your release looked at. An important newswire to be aware of, and this is another form of electronic distribution, is PR Newswire. There are thousands of media outlets from sports organizations to non-sporting organizations that participate on this newswire, and they can put news releases directly on there that then get into news departments around the country. So something just to be aware of. A final item that the chapter is going to talk about are media kits. Media kits are still distributed in paper, so you would create a paper media kit, and they're also distributed electronically today. Both versions still exist, very common. These can include biographies of people in your sporting organization, fact sheets about a new product, as well as other items depending on the event. Social media releases are done online and have hyperlinks that can bring journalists to different elements of a website or to provide more information about a product. You can include actualities, which are sound bites or podcasts in electronic forms of media kits. You can include B-roll. So if you work for an organization and you just built a brand new sports arena, you could take video of the arena and send that out as B-roll, and then members of the media could cover the opening of this facility by using the footage that you provide. Other items that are included are video news releases. You can include tags, bookmarks, or even photography. And the point of media kits is to provide as much information directly to the media, so they'll take that information and hopefully create stories about your product or your event or your organization in their media outlet. Thank you for listening to the video lecture for Chapter 8. Today we continued our conversation on the role of the media and looked specifically at how to write and create news releases. We went over the TIP-CUP acronym, which is a way to help remember the newsworthiness of a news release. We looked at how to put one of these things together with a header, a title, a lead, the body, and the boilerplate, as well as that 30 ending notation. We talked about types and functions of releases, how they can be distributed, as well as media kits, which is still a very important part of working with the media within sport PR. Thanks so much for listening.